You're listening to Inside Air, a behind-the-wire view of the Royal Air Force, its people, technology and operations.
Hi, I'm Flight Lieutenant Chris Sully and welcome to the latest RAF Inside Air podcast. In this episode, we're at the annual RAF Training Specialisation Conference at RAF Halton to hear about the plans and challenges facing the team that delivers the training.
So future capabilities may depend on future threats. Ultimately, what that's all about is making sure that the right training is delivered in the right way.
It also provides a framework how we can manage our specialists, so we can look at how we go through a whole remit of different phases of their career, how we attract them, how we select them, how we recruit them, how we train them, employ them, pay them, and then how we retain them, we resettle them and we re-engage with them.
From a physical training perspective, our role is to try and evolve what the RAF fitness and health strategy is, where we're looking to get into the space of human performance, where we're looking at things like move, eat, think and sleep.
As usual, we'll also reheat a few stories which might have slipped under your radar, and we'll be finding out who's under the hat this week with AS1 Ben Russell.
What's the best thing about your job?
The diversity of different jobs that we get.
Hardest part of your job?
Definitely the timing, so there could be lots and lots of jobs on all at the same time, so getting from one place to another.
And what's your proudest moment in the RAF?
Helping with the brand new protector build, that was incredible to be a part of and work with the 31 Squadron team.
The annual RAF Training Specialisation Conference has just taken place at RAF Halton in Buckinghamshire. Military training specialists are at the very heart of preparing future forces personnel to be able to deliver capability to fly and fight. Working across a range of specialisations, the team are involved at every stage of RAF personnel's careers. AS1 Emma Kirwan chatted with some of those who are taking part in this year's conference to hear about their plans and challenges.
I've been at RAF Halton for the annual RAF Training Specialisation Conference. I went along to Commode Hall Lecture Theatre to find out about the aims of it and plans for the specialisation. Firstly, I spoke to Group Captain Malmeth, who is the head of the Military Training Specialisation, and Wing Commander Pearson, who's the Professions Advisor. They told me one theme of the conference is about providing direction. The first voice you'll hear is Group Captain Malmeth.
The Military Training Specialisation comprises 682 posts, which is formed from the non-commissioned Trade Group 10, PTIs, and then the PERS training officers, who currently are a specialisation within the Royal Air Force. As we move forward, we're going to be merging with People Ops to form a combined profession, and that'll happen towards the middle of next year as part of Programme Professions, which I think your listeners have heard about before.
What do training specialists actually do in the organisation?
So we're really focused around several core functions. So it's really looking to the future of our capabilities and making sure that the force are prepared for the roles they're going to be doing there. So the first thing that's required within that is to analyse what the requirement is. So looking at and not just leaping into, well, just starting with training, it's right, really analyse what's required, what capability are we trying to generate in the future. And then it's interpreting that, putting that into its military context, and making sure that really we're able to use that as a capability in that military context. Then formulating the plans, how we bring that into action, and making sure that's a workable solution. We then design that training. Then we deliver in some aspects. A lot of the delivery aspects maybe are done from our PTIs in some of those bits. And when we're looking at other capabilities, it might be specialist instructors in some of those roles that are outside of the military training specialisation. But we've done that contextualisation and formulation of training. And then after that's been delivered, or whilst it's still being delivered, we need to assure that what it is we've analysed, interpreted, formulated, designed, delivered, that is actually appropriate for role. So we're assuring all of that training, and we'll revisit that cycle if it needs improving.
And that's nothing new. It's something that is directed to us through the Defence Systems approach to training. So that's all about analysing, designing, delivering and assuring training in the best way possible. So we're following orders, but we're doing so in a way that is contextually military, and making sure that we do that to optimise the Air Force and its outputs.
When you talk about the capabilities that the RAF will need in the future, what kind of things are you talking about? What are you focusing on?
So future capabilities may depend on future threats, and I think what's important is that whilst we look generically about analysis, interpretation, formulation, design, delivery and assurance, ultimately what that's all about is making sure that the right training is delivered in the right way for what the requirements are in the future, and that adaptability of military training specialists is what will ensure that we give the Air Force what it needs in the future.
You mentioned the directive, sir, so what actually is that?
So the directive is really centred on how we train, prepare and enable the force to fly and fight. So fly and fight is very much a mantra of Chief of the Air Staff at the moment and the Air and Space Commander, and so we've looked at that in terms of higher intent. We've done an extraction of orders to work out what the military training specialists in the Royal Air Force need to do to contribute to our output. We're really seeking to clarify our mission as military training specialists and also to provide that strategic direction that is linked to the RAF strategy, the RAF command plan and of course Agile Combat Employment Directive. What we've done through the directive is create a framework that will enable effective management and assurance of our specialisations outputs, and we're going to be using a 2-star level committee, the Training Requirements Oversight Committee, to ensure that our military training specialists are doing exactly what the frontline commanders all the way up to and including the Chief of the Air Staff require of our military training specialists.
And so what's your take on this directive and your involvement?
My involvement has been drawing most of it together, to be honest, to provide that direction to our specialists to really understand, as the boss says, that extraction of orders and clarity of their mission, which, as we always said there, is to train, prepare and enable the force to fly and fight. So to really focus on that mission. It's for our senior commanders to understand exactly what we're delivering for them, but then it also provides a means of action, so that we've got something that we can absolutely assure our activity around and provide the mechanisms to elevate any risks to output so that we can actually take action to mitigate those. It also provides a framework how we can manage our specialists, so we can look at how we go through a whole remit of different phases of their career, how we attract them, how we select them, how we recruit them, how we train them, employ them, pay them, and then how we retain them, we resettle them and we re-engage with them. So it's very important that we're using people on a whole life cycle, and that when people leave regular service that we can re-engage with them and give them opportunity to come and serve on different terms and conditions of service.
And what are the benefits of all of what you've just said for the individual, for personnel?
So the benefit, for both the organisation and the individual, is looking at the different terms and conditions of service that people can serve on, and using that those employment mechanisms flexibly, so the individuals benefit and get to operate in for their time of life, for their circumstances, so that we can make that an appealing employment proposition. Then clearly the service benefit from harnessing the skills, the time that we've invested in their training, that specialist knowledge, skills, experience that we can then put into the right place at the right time. So it really is a mutual benefit to both parties.
One of the things that we've actually instigated in the last few months is a thing called the Training Support Group. So it builds upon a concept of employing volunteer ex-regular reserves. We've currently got a thing called the CSG, so the Command Support Group, and we have BSGs on different stations, so base support groups. So Wing Commander Pearson and I thought, look, why don't we look at this through a slightly different lens and have a thing called the Training Support Group, whereby we keep PTIs and training officers who are perhaps retiring or moving on to a different type of service, and then attract them back in. So we keep them on the books and we can use them on smaller project-based work to come back in to do targeted pockets of output that we need them to do. So it's very much within the full spectrum of service side of the Haythornthwaite report, which is one of the recommendations out of that, to say, think about how we can retain people perhaps in different guises under different terms and conditions of service.
And what benefit do they bring, the reserves?
Well, potentially, if they're working in civilian jobs, they can come out, they can leave the Air Force, perhaps come back in with more experience. They can go out for various reasons, whether it's a family circumstances or perhaps they've reached a pension point, and then we can still retain them in any guise to come in and do those pockets of work for us.
How do you add value to the RAF?
Well, I believe that military training specialists are at the absolute heart of what we do in the Royal Air Force. I've often used an equation, not that I'm a maths teacher, but there is an equation that says capability is formed from people and equipment. And the problem is that people and equipment doesn't actually give you capability, because what you need to do is times that by training. Because if you have an individual who's not trained to use or to operate the equipment that we use in the Royal Air Force, often very highly complicated and technologically advanced, then you don't actually have any capability. So from that respect, as the head of the specialisation, I'm very keen to ensure that all of the 2-star users of our military training specialists understand how we contribute to their outputs, and also really sit centrally to their risk mitigation going forward.
Where do they work around the RAF and operations then?
So the 682 posts are very much scattered across the Air Force's domain, and of course into Strategic Command and indeed into some of the other single services. But the Royal Air Force has a huge number of them across 1 group, 2 group, 11 group, of course 22 group being a very big employer, and then of course across the directors. Director People has trainers embedded within it, as does Director Support.
So you mentioned earlier on about merging with People Ops. What's the thought behind that?
So we've been a bit on again, off again with this over the years. I joined as an admin training officer back in 2001. Since then, we've turned into a personnel training specialisation. Of course, the PTIs have retained their Trade Group 10 and being PTIs throughout. But the idea under Programme Professions, which I know you've had a separate episode about, is that we're migrating from 67, 68 different trades and branches into 11 professions. And so the idea being that we can merge with People Ops. I've always associated myself with the people profession. We're driving forward on accreditation of our military training specialists through CIPD, for example. And there are lots of synergies. We train people, and the people specialists, of course, are managing. They're looking after HR, they're looking after infrastructure, they're looking after media operations. So lots of synergies in our different worlds where we'll be able to work together and potentially migrate between those different career streams as we advance through the ranks in the Royal Air Force.
What kind of challenges do you think that you face as a specialisation?
I think the challenges are just the work behind it, really, and actually putting the brain power behind how we can make the most success of the merger into professions, and there's huge opportunity, and really I think that's just the opportunity there to harness it, and it's just going to be the hard work to put that behind it. I think the directive gives us a real focused opportunity, that we've got a structure and a framework whereby we can elevate any problems that we do foresee, but we can do that early and we can get them elevated to the correct level. I think the same challenges that face the rest of the Air Force are similar to ourselves, that we do need to work hard to retain our people, to give them an offer, to make them feel valued, and we continue to work on a daily basis to do that. So yeah, I think our challenges are pretty much the same as the rest of the Air Forces, and we work across all the professions as a unit to try and address those.
The world's quite a different place since February 2022, and of course we've got a completely different threat that we're facing. So military training specialists are out there analysing what we might need to do in the future. So we very much sit in that 5 space in terms of planning ahead. One of our core functions, of course, is to interpret what the challenges are going to be in the future, and then work very hard to instil what needs to be instilled into individuals. So 2 examples of that more recently: agile combat employment, that I know has been talked about on Inside Air before. That's a great concept, but it all relies on people being able to be trained and ready to deploy, so the preparedness for operations. And then another initiative launched by the Air and Space Commander very recently, Optimise. So that's looking at how we don't pedal faster, we change gear, and one way of changing gear is to use military training specialists to assist with how we're training people through that process. And so one of my call to arms over the last 24 hours or so on this conference has been thinking about how in everything that we do we can improve the effectiveness and the operational effectiveness of the Royal Air Force. So it's really front and centre in what we're asking people to do through this newly launched directive.
What kind of reaction have you had at the conference?
When we first came into post, approximately 15 months ago, the thing we were asked for was direction, and was to really draw these different strands of the profession together, of the specialisation together, and provide that direction. As the boss mentioned previously, there's been some changes within the specialisation over the last probably 5 to 8 years, and that's brought with it some turbulence and maybe a bit of a lack of exactly what's the specialisation about. And the directive aims to do that and provide that clarity of mission. It will sit perfectly within the newly merged people ops profession. It's all aimed at developing people capability and improving our people and supporting that. So it will sit within the future merged people operations profession, but at this point, as we still work through that merger, this gives direction to our military training specialists. So I think that has been very well received by people.
Can you talk about any even bigger future plans?
Yes, certainly. So our vision for the training specialisation, which again is published in the directive, is that we've got an RAF specialisation that provides commanders with expert military training advice and enabling functions in order to generate military capability. So the military is mentioned twice in there, and that is because without military training specialists, we would not be able to do this. So it's very, very important for us to have people who understand the military context, who can take that forward. I'm all for the whole force, and we certainly have many people operating in different reservist capacities across the civil service, very much in the instructional space, of course, with civil service instructors, and of course in the contracted space as well, with our industry partners, some of whom are here today to talk to us about how they're innovating in industry and the commercial world. But I sort of see going forward that merged enterprise approach to how we go about military training, really growing much further. We're in challenging times in terms of the threats that we face, and we owe it to our senior commanders to get the training right.
Have you got enough military training specialists?
Well, we've got those posts, but they're not all filled, and I think this is a challenge across the Royal Air Force at the moment in terms of recruitment and retention. I'd like to think that the proposition for joining as either as a PTI in a non-commissioned sense, or indeed as a military training specialist officer in the commissioned ranks is still a really attractive and interesting role. Huge amount of diversity across things that you can go and do, working across not just flying training, but of course into all of our ground trades and branches as they are currently, and moving forward across those 11 professions.
Next, I spoke to some of the other speakers at the conference. Flight Lieutenant Sutherland is the OC formal training at the School of Physical Training. He talked about his recent deployment to Baghdad.
I've just delivered a brief to the wider training specialisation cadre on my recent deployment to Baghdad under Opshada with NATO Mission Iraq.
What was that deployment all about?
So that was an advisory mission in which I was advising to the Iraqi Air Force and Iraqi Army Aviation training schools on how to better advance their training systems. It feeds into the wider NATO mission, which is to provide a sustainable, transparent, inclusive and operationally effective Iraqi armed forces in order for them to produce counter-terrorism operations against Daesh.
How does that benefit the RAF?
Well, first and foremost, I was representing defence in a training capacity, so there is that. But in the wider Air Force context, I was there as a sole training specialist, so I was the key representative in that field. How it benefits the Air Force is, well, I'm able to represent us and integrate with a multinational force, so give the best representation of us, but also I'm there to pick up and learn lessons and therefore bring them back and disseminate them across the training specialisation cadre, but also across the Air Force.
What pre-deployment training did you go through?
It's quite an extensive pre-deployment training. There's a lot of online learning that you have to conduct, a lot of mandatory training you have to conduct before you even do anything. You then have to go to RAF Halton and conduct global high threat training, and there is also a 2-week package with NATO, which is 1 week virtual and 1 week in Bydgoszcz in order to deploy. And then once you arrive in theatre, you conduct quite an extensive RSOI package.
How did you find all of that training? How did it prepare you for actually getting out there?
it is very good training. It's really good for what you need. It prepares you fully for all of the threats that you might encounter, and the BIDGOSH training, the NATO element, was excellent in preparing you for what you were going to conduct while you're out there. So what was expected, how to conduct yourself, and what you need to do in order to be successful.
Were there any challenges that you faced?
Yeah, there's quite a few challenges. Environmentally being one. You know, I got out there and it was actually pretty cold, and then by the time I left it was 53 degrees. People had snakes in their rooms, so there was a few environmental challenges. Language barrier is obviously one. The cultural differences, they're quite not difficult to get attuned to, but you've got to switch on at them pretty quick. And then there's obviously the threat. Iraq is a non-permissive country. There is an indirect fire threat. There is a drone threat. There is an espionage and information operations threat, as well as civil unrest. So there are a lot of threats out there. So you have to cast one eye on those as well as conducting your primary role.
And back here, obviously being at the conference, what kind of messages are you trying to deliver today?
Why do we need training officers there? Why is it that we needed a training specialist in that environment? Could anybody from the Air Force have conducted that role? That was one of my key messages. And another key message really was that to encourage people to apply. I think the more people that apply for the job, the better quality of candidate we're going to send, and the better effect we'll have operationally, but also the more we can learn and bring back to the cadre as a whole.
And what do you like so much about the job?
I love deploying. I think deploying operationally is such a privilege. You go out there and the ability to influence but also absorb the part of the culture and share cultures with people, I think is fantastic. And in an advisory role, that's essentially what you're doing daily. So I really enjoy that aspect.
While Warrant Officer Callaghan is the profession's advisor for Trade Group 10, which includes RAF physical training instructors. He told me one of his aims is to make people more aware about the role of PTIs.
I'm here at the conference today to represent the RAF PTI in the military training specialisation and the role that we actually bring to the Air Force and how important we are as a cog to making this machine work.
How important are you?
If we look at it from a military perspective, wherever there are people, then obviously we need to sort of focus on their development. So from a physical training perspective, our role is to try and evolve what the RAF fitness and health strategy is, particularly looking at where we're looking to get into the space of human performance, where we're looking at things like move, eat, think and sleep. And then what we actually offer in those areas to actually make personnel perform at their best in a day-to-day role.
Why is that needed?
I suppose it's twofold, really. So we're here to try and develop the individual, which will then obviously enhance the operational effectiveness of not only the individual but actually the service of a whole. So when we're looking at it, the twofold part of it is we are here to try and decrease obesity, reduce MSKI, provide more personnel to the front line so they can actually conduct their tasks, but also secondly to look at what most people sort of discuss as the pointy end of the stick. So when we're looking at things like aircrew, making sure we conduct our aircrew conditioning programs to make sure that they're operational for flying. When we look at RAF regiment, making sure that they're fit to fight. And it goes back to the whole ACE concept, where we are trying to produce a force which is able to fight and to fly and fight.
So you mentioned obesity then, like how is that quite a big problem in the military, in the RAF at the moment?
Currently I think obesity is on the rise generally across the Air Force, but again that is in keeping with probably I think national statistics as well, and that's why I think it's now coming to a head where we do need to try and focus our efforts on not only the pointy end of the spear with the 1%, but actually getting stuck into the general population as well, to provide them that sort of that guidance and education around the whole sort of move, eat, think, sleep, how important those four components are to actually make that individual the best individual they can be. The thing about the PTI is we have a number of subspecializations. So we operate in the exercise rehabilitation sphere, the parachute jump sphere, the force development sphere, and in the SEER sphere. So the survive, evade, resist, and evacuate sort of sphere as well as our mainstream jobs as well. Our job there is to help, and we're very, very keen to help individuals on the ground. And probably my biggest thing is for them is not to be scared and come and speak to us, because we have a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of experience. We're very desperate to help, and not to be scared of the PTI and actually come down and actually use us, because we are a tool which is a very, very valuable tool on every station.
What's your favourite part of the job?
I'm an exercise rehabilitation instructor by background, so probably mine is helping people get better. So I spent 19 years working in defence primary health care, secondary care, tertiary care, and where I got most gratitude was actually seeing people achieve their goals at the end of the day. So when they come in, when they need you at their most valuable time, is that ability to step forward, to help, to provide the education, the guidance, to actually make sure they can obviously heal and actually return back to frontline duties. So by the time they actually get back to do the job which they're employed to do, is probably my biggest gratification. I think from my side of things, I think one of the things is people underestimate the role of the RAF physical training instructor in general. They don't really truly understand what it is we're there for, and actually what skills we have and how we can actually benefit the service as a whole. That includes operating at main units as well as on deployments as well. And I think there's a greater understanding of what it is we're there to assist and deliver. We're a much more versatile beast than people think. We're not just here to deliver fitness tests and lunchtime circuits. We have a vast array of skill sets, and we can help where required.
Whose job is it to get that message out?
So in order to get the message out, it's ultimately the responsibility of myself as the Professions Advisor for Trade Group 10, but also the Professions team in terms of the head of our specialisation and ultimately the Commandant, our head of profession. And we've kind of achieved that, but with the Military Training Directive, the Training Specialisation Directive, which we've got at the minute, it's now been pushed up, so it's now got sort of 2-star approval. So we've now gained this traction from the top to actually now start disseminating, and what that's got is the highlight that actually we have these specialists within the training specialisation. So we have the training officer, we have the physical training instructor, we have the parachute jump instructor, the exercise rehabilitation instructor, the force development instructor. So we have all these tools which are there for the commander's use, for their best use for their team, and the whole point of this conference and this is to now tell our people that this directive is in place. It now has 2-star approval, and actually they now need to start stepping forward to get out there and actually start delivering the intent that we actually need them to deliver.
There you've heard some of the challenges and plans for military training specialists. It sounds like a really interesting and rewarding career with plenty of opportunities to deploy. And as you heard Group Captain Melmoth say, there's still a number of posts available.
With Reheat for Inside Air, I'm AS1 Victoria Andrews. Royal Air Force Typhoons, working with French Rafale and US F-35 fighter jets, have practiced dispersal and responding to simulated attacks. Squadron Leader Sainty, OCB Flight 12 Squadron, explains.
We're currently going through exercise Atlantic Trident 23. We are practicing what we call agile combat employment. So we're working alongside our coalition partners, our friends from France and from the USA, deployed here at Limaine to practice being agile, practice working out of an environment that we're not used to. During one of the large force exercises that we were conducting over the North Sea, we had an intelligence brief that all our main operating bases that we'd taken off from had all been simulated bombed, so they were now close to us. So we were given a last-minute inject that we had to land at RAF Limaine.
After successfully relocating to a remote corner of the airbase, they established secure communications and connected with command and control centres, both on the ground and in the air, to receive tasking orders, including counter-air missions to protect the carrier support group. Gladiator, the Royal Air Force's new synthetic training system, has been used by RAF Waddington's Air Battlespace Training Centre in its first major international exercise. Spartan Warrior, a 4-day-long exercise, saw several challenging virtual air operations, requiring all the participating nations to work together in a challenging yet secure and safe environment. Elsewhere, staff from Heathrow Airport and the Met Police worked with RAF personnel to take part in a planned resilience training exercise, testing a multi-agency response to an aircraft hijack scenario. Exercise Night Star saw RAF Typhoon jets scrambled from RAF Coningsby to escort a passenger aircraft to the London airport. The exercise was designed to test the skills of police officers and staff from different units, including hostage negotiators, investigators and firearms officers who boarded the 160-seater plane. And personnel from RAF Akrotiri have pulled a 1,300-kilogram field gun over 10 kilometres of rough terrain for charity. The British Forces Cyprus Field Gun crew completed a testing route around the base in 1 hour and 39 minutes in support of the Royal Navy and Royal Marines charity. That's Reheat on Inside Air.
Thanks, Vic. And now it's time to find out who's under the hat with Ben.
I'm AS1 Ben Russell, and this is Under the Hat, where we get to know an aviator in less than a minute. Name you're known by.
AS1 Niall Austin.
What's your profession?
I'm a photographer based at RAF Waddington.
What's the best thing about your job?
The diversity of different jobs that we get. One day you could be recording or taking photos of an aircraft taking off, and then the next day you could be doing some tech work, taking pictures of interesting stuff that's either broken or needs an upgrade.
Hardest part of your job?
Definitely the timing, so there could be lots and lots of jobs on all at the same time, so getting from one place to another and being able to do your job to the best of your ability can definitely be quite difficult sometimes, but for the most part we can cope with it and it's all good.
Best location you've served?
RAF Staxton Wold near Scarborough. That was for the building of a new radar system which was displayed at REAC 2023. That was definitely a great job as it's something that I've never sort of done before. Being able to see people doing their trades is also really nice to see, so working with all different trades in the Air Force.
What bit of luxury kit do you never deploy without?
My Canon R5, it's the best camera that I've ever used. It makes my job a lot easier to do.
And what's your proudest moment in the RAF?
Helping with the brand new Protector build. That was incredible to be a part of and work with the 31 Squadron team.
Thank you, AS1 Austin, for putting us in the picture on another instalment of Under the Hat.
That's all for this episode of Inside Air. Please give us a review, subscribe on your favourite podcast app, and join us again soon.
You've been listening to Inside Air, a behind-the-wire view of the Royal Air Force, its people, technology and operations. If you're serving in the RAF and have a story for us, please speak to your unit media and communications officer. Inside Air is written and produced for the Royal Air Force by RAF Media Reserves.